So, good afternoon, everyone. Yesterday, we were talking about the India-Bangladesh relationship. We had broadly completed a discussion on the same, on the India-Bangladesh relationship and its evolution. Now, so that is there, and today we'll firstly start with Sri Lanka. Okay. Now, starting with Sri Lanka, so when we talk about the India-Sri Lanka relationship, in terms of talking about the India-Sri Lanka relationship, what are the things to be kept in mind? See, now again, whenever we talk about the India-Sri Lanka relationship also, one is that we'll look at the historical context of the relationship, or how the India-Sri Lanka relationship has historically evolved over the decades. And here, when we talk about the historical background, one of the most important things that has there is the Tamil question. You know, one of the issues largely has been the issue of the Tamil question, and you know, from the IPKF to the 13th Amendment. And beyond. Okay, that's one question or one major issue. The other issue is the fishermen issue, which is related to another issue of the Kachativu Island. And the third issue is about the China factor, in the India, about the China factor in the India-Bangladesh relationship and its evolution. Sorry, India-Sri Lanka relationship. And its evolution. Now, when we talk about, actually, they can ask you a question on IPKF related thing also in your GS paper 1 post-independence history. See, the IPKF, the Indian peacekeeping force or the Indian peacekeeping mission to send to Sri Lanka is one of the few military missions, or one of the few missions where India has actually put troops on ground in another country in a domestic issue of another country in its individual capability. Or that India, it's been one of those few issues or few countries where India has actually put troops on ground. And what led to all of that, etc., that is what we're going to discuss. Also, this was in 1987. And till 1989, Indian troops were in, till the beginning of till the end of 1989, they were on the ground in Sri Lanka for 2 years, 2.5 years. And they can ask you a question on this in post-independence history also. And because if you look from 1989 till 2019, that's a good 30 years. So even in post-independence history, they can ask you a question on what led to India deploying the IPKF mission in Sri Lanka, its consequences or its significance. Okay, so that is that. It's an important event of post-independence history. Pardon? Kachativu Island. KachatEevu, the Kachativu Island issue. Now let's start with the historical background of the relationship itself. Now, I don't want to get into the details from your examination point of view. When we look at the historical background of the relationship, one of the first things, even before historical background, is to know the significance and the background of Sri Lanka. Now, when we talk about the background and the significance, firstly, when we talk about the background of Sri Lanka, you have something about, when we talk about the background of Sri Lanka, one is that Sri Lanka is situated some 90 nautical miles, or sorry, okay, that's about Maldives. Sri Lanka is situated some few nautical miles off the coast of the southern tip of India, right? And that is itself something that can, that is important from India's viewpoint, in the sense that Shiv Shankar Menon, for example, argued that Sri Lanka is like an aircraft carrier sitting on the tip of India, in the sense that whichever naval presence or military presence in Sri Lanka of any third party can have serious consequences for India. Secondly, Sri Lanka, like Maldives, sits on a number of major trading routes passing through Indian Ocean. Moreover, ports like Colombo, the Colombo port is a major port through which Indian goods are also routed through third countries. Colombo port is a major deep sea port, and it has the capacity of taking in ships with large cargo. Many Indian ports do not have these kind of capacities to take in ships with large cargo. So what happens is that goods go from India to Colombo, and from Colombo they go to other countries. Okay. So in that context, it sits on a number of major trading routes passing through the Indian Ocean, and thus is of vital importance to maintain the safety and security of sea lanes. To maintain the safety and security of sea lanes. Now, another thing about its background is the factor. Another thing about its background is the factor of Sri Lanka's ethnic composition. Now, when we talk about Sri Lanka's ethnic composition, what one finds is that what one knows about Sri Lanka is that Sri Lanka has a northern province, and it is in this northern province that a number of Tamils or the Sri Lankan Tamils are based, and partly in the east of Sri Lanka, or in the eastern portion of Sri Lanka, there are a number of Sri Lankan Tamils also a number of whom are also Muslims. Whereas in the center and in the south, the majority of the population is of the Sinhalese Buddhists. Now, it is in this context that one of the first things to know is that the Tamilian population in Sri Lanka is also of broadly two different types. The Tamilian population in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan Tamils can be broadly grouped into two different types. One type is that of the grouping of Sri Lankan Tamils. One type is that of the native Sri Lankan Tamils, and these are roughly 11% of the population. The native Sri Lankan Tamils are roughly 11% of the population, and they are the ones. See, now one of the things about Sri Lankan Tamils is, let me just first explain briefly, is that when we talk about Sri Lankan Tamils, one of the first things to know is that the Tamilian population in Sri Lanka is of two types. One, you see, Sri Lanka was also what? A British colony. Sri Lanka or Ceylon was also a British colony. And when this was a British colony, a large number of plantation workers. The Sri Lankans set up the tea plantations in, the Britishers set up the tea plantations in Sri Lanka. They brought in a large number of workers or indentured laborers to work on the tea plantations in Sri Lanka. From where? From the Tamil Nadu region. And these were the ones whom we call as the migrant Tamil population. They were roughly 2 to 3% of the Sri Lankan Tamilian population. Whereas, but there's a big difference between the native Sri Lankan Tamilians who for generations or for centuries itself have been the original inhabitants of this region. Okay, so a number of Sri Lankan Tamils have been original inhabitants of this region for a long, time. So, in that context, you see that a number of Sri Lankan Tamils have been original inhabitants of this region for a long time, for centuries altogether. You know, if you remember from the Chola Empire, and even before the Chola Empire, you see there has been a Tamilian population which has resided in Sri Lanka. So, almost for 1,000 years or more. Okay. So, these native Sri Lankan Tamilian population, which were a minority in the north, before Sri Lanka's independence in 1950, though they were a minority, they were better educated, primarily in the English language, and better educated as compared to whom? As compared to the native Sinhalese Buddhists. Okay, so they were better educated with the proficiency in the English language and had a predominance in a number of government jobs and had a predominance in a number of government jobs. Now, that's not all. And as compared to whom? As compared to the Sinhalese Buddhists, okay, which were the majority population. But what about the migrant Tamil population. They were poor, often received low wages in the tea plantations, and with little rights or political representation. So that's the first thing to know about the Sri Lankan Tamils themselves. Okay. Now, or the difference, broad difference between the two groups of Sri Lankan Tamils. So put together, they would be probably around some 13-14% of the population in Sri Lanka. Put together, there would be something about 13-14% population in Sri Lanka, and you know, but there is a difference between the two. Now, once Sri Lanka gains independence, who formed PAR who came to PAR in 1950? So in 1950, a Sinhalese majority-led government was established. A Sinhalese majority-led government was established in Sri Lanka. And which took a series of steps to what? Appropriate the majority of government jobs, or majority of government jobs, and marginalize whom? The Sri Lankan Tamils. How? That in 1956 they introduced the official language policy. The official language policy was introduced in 1956, and under this official language policy, the Sinhalese was given the status of the only official language. So Sinhalese was given the status of the only official language. Sinhalese was given the status of the only official language. Now this meant what? Neither English nor Tamil. Neither English nor Tamil was to enjoy the status of an official language, only Sinhalese. And this was primarily why? Because the Sinhalese did not, because there were not a large number of Sinhalese educated in the English language and already in government jobs. And this was primarily to ensure that the Sinhalese captured the majority of the government jobs and higher positions. And it was a Sinhalese-led government. And so this is like what? A one language policy. This is like saying that only one language will have the status of a national language, while English and Tamil were not granted English and Tamil were not granted a similar status. Now, and the marginalization of the Tamils continued. And you see in 1960 and 1963, you know, what had started to happen. देखिए, there is, वैसे अगर आप डिटेल में पढ़ें, yes. रेसिडेंट तमिल्स उनके साथ पार्शियलिटी मतलब पार्शियलिटी मतलब, पार्शियलिटी तो पॉजिटिव भी हो सकता है, नेगेटिव, मतलब क्या कहना चाह रहे हैं आप? डिस्क्रिमिनेशन और पार्शियलिटी क्या मतलब, शब्दों का चयन सही करिए. हाँ. So it is, yes, it is discriminatory against Tamilians in general, whether they are native Tamilians. So the official language policy is discriminatory against Tamilians, whether they are native Tamilians or native Sri Lankan Tamils or the one who came as indentured laborers. It is discriminatory against both. That's it. So one of the things is that why I have told you this differentiation is that the demand or the leadership of the LTT or the major militant groups in Sri Lanka came from whom? Came from the educated Sri Lankan Tamils. Okay, it didn't come from the marginalized 2% of the population, it came from the educated Sri Lankan Tamils. Please understand, all over the world, leadership of any marginalized group often comes from its educated section. And here amongst the Tamilians also the leadership is coming from the Sri Lankan educated Tamilian section. Now, see, if you actually look at the whole Sri Lankan question, it tells you a lot about the India's Kashmir question. Okay, but I mean, obviously nobody is going to ask you such a question in your exam, but there's always that possibility that you can always compare, just for your own understanding. Now, what do you see in 1960 and 63? The Sinhalese government, in a move to consolidate its hold over the northern territories or the northern provinces, officially started sponsoring actions where the Sinhalese could go and buy property. The Sinhalese could go and buy what? Property in the northern provinces. The Sinhalese could go and buy property in the northern provinces. And if the Sinhalese could go and buy property in the northern provinces, this is something that will consolidate the hold of the Buddhists and marginalize the Sinhalese and marginalize the Tamils further. Okay, many a number of people are like, Article 35 hata do or whatever, Article 370, 35, etc. If you remove, then what is the next step? Is that people from Delhi will go to Srinagar and buy property in Srinagar. Okay, but that's if you remove these kind of restrictions from Jammu and Kashmir. But these kind of restrictions exist in elsewhere also, in Himachal Pradesh and in the whole of northeastern states in India. Almost all northeastern states in India, you cannot go and buy property. Okay, almost, not all, but almost all. Including in Himachal Pradesh, you cannot buy property. Including in Jammu and Kashmir, you can't buy property. Because otherwise, there's always this fear of demographic inversion of these states. The population of these states is less. And हमारे पास क्या है North India में? Huge population, sir. And population with surplus money also. So they're like, kahan hai property sasti? Chalo. Okay. So that is it. And that can cause a demographic inversion and more, even political instability in these regions. So in that context, you see in 1960 and 63, the Sinhalese Buddhist governments, the Sinhalese government officially sponsored a number of settlement projects for Sinhalese. Population in the northern province, further marginalizing the Sri Lankan Tamils. It is after this time, and see, now herein is the other context of domestic politics in India. What is happening is that during the 1950s, India also had this language or linguistic conflicts going on, particularly in the southern states. Particularly one of the prominent southern states was where this language conflict was ongoing was, whether that's Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu also. And there was this idea in 1950, we had said that after 15 years, which is the transition period, Hindi will become the official language. So in 1960, there was a lot of resentment in Tamil Nadu also with this, with what was perceived as the imposition of, the which language? The Hindi language on the Tamilian population. Okay. And ultimately, the Indian government gave in to Tamilian demands and came up with what was called as a 3-language formula. That one official, there will be no national language. One official language would be English, the other official language would be Hindi, and the third official language would be the regional language of that particular state. So with this 3-language formula, you see what was achieved was incorporation of whose demands? The demands of the Tamilian population in Tamil Nadu. And there had been a number of secessionist voices also, which said that if New Delhi wants to impose Hindi on us in Tamil Nadu, then Tamil Nadu can secede from India and form a union of its own. By 1961-62, these questions had been largely addressed to the satisfaction of the Tamilian population. Parties like the DMK, as you see today, who were earlier secessionists in 1960-61, started taking part in elections. And by 1963, you see, there was a certain degree of satisfaction. There was a certain degree of satisfaction in Tamil Nadu that their demands on linguistic accommodation had largely been kept in mind by whom? The Indian government. However, the question still remained, the situation still remained sensitive, because while in India, the Tamilian population's demand had been largely accommodated, in Sri Lanka, it did not seem that any of this was happening. Rather, the opposite was happening. The marginalization of Tamils in Sri Lanka had continued since the 1950s. So in 1960-63, when what happened is that these a large number of settlement projects for Sinhalese population in the northern provinces were being set up, further marginalizing the Sri Lankan Tamils. A number of, what will happen, sir? A number of riots broke out. A number of riots broke out in Sri Lanka. Sorry, a number of riots broke out in the northern provinces in Sri Lanka. And in these riots, there was large-scale violence against the Sri Lankan Tamils. Now, when there is a large-scale violence against Sri Lankan Tamils, this is a matter of concern for whom? India. This is a matter of concern for India because the India's population, or the Tamil Nadu, or the Tamil population in Tamil Nadu in India had a significant amount of sympathy for whom? The Sri Lankan Tamils, to whom they were ethnically, linguistically and culturally related. And it is at this time that the Tamil population, parties like DMK, etc., were asking India, what is New Delhi doing to ensure that the Tamil population in Sri Lanka is not marginalized? So there was domestic pressure building up in India from Tamil Nadu to do something about the Tamil question in Sri Lanka and talk to the Sri Lankan government. Now this is also in the background that Sri Lanka was also a non-aligned country, a NAM country. Sri Lanka was also a NAM country during the Cold War. Sri Lanka also talked about socialism, etc. So partly it was also a NAM country, it was also talking about socialism, and it was located in the immediate backyard of India. And India, being much larger, was bound to have a say if it wanted in the Sri Lankan affairs, especially on the Tamil question. So you see, there was a lot of domestic pressure on the Indian government also. So, under or the Indian government was under considerable domestic pressure. The Indian government was under considerable domestic pressure to act upon the deteriorating situation in Tamil Nadu, upon the deteriorating situation in Sri Lanka, to secure the rights of Sri Lankan Tamils. Sorry. Now, this is there, and you see, it came to the question of the tea plantation workers or the Tamil migrants, as they were called. When it came to the issue of the Tamil migrants at this point of time, or the migrant Tamilian population, the Sri Lankan government also at this point of time said that this Tamil migrant population is not a Sri Lankan citizen. They are not Sri Lankan citizens, and so they must be deported. Deported to whom? India. Okay. Now, India, however, could not, accept this kind of a deportation with any ease because of the domestic repercussions. Because of the domestic repercussions that such a agreement would have. If India had agreed to this deportation of Tamilians from Sri Lanka, then it would have domestic implications that Indian government is doing nothing to ensure the rights of Sri Lankans ensure the rights of Tamilians in Sri Lanka, and rather it is further hand in glove with the Sri Lankan government to marginalize Tamilians. So in that context, the Indian government is a very tricky situation. However, 1964 and 1974, there were two agreements where a certain number of Tamilians, native Tamilians, a certain number of migrant Tamils who had gone to Sri Lanka as workers in plantations, if they wanted to come back, they were offered a one-time settlement. That a small or some out of some 60-70,000 would be given citizenship in India, and the rest will be given citizenship in Sri Lanka. So the Sri Lankan government and the Indian government reached a compromise, okay, in 1964 and 74. We don't need to get into the details. Now, however, by the 1970s, the marginalization of the Sri Lankan Tamils continued, and TULF, the Tamil Union Liberation Front, was a political organization formed by Sri Lankan Tamils to contest elections in the north, was formed by Sri Lankan Tamils to contest elections where? In north. And this was a political party formed in the 1970s. But by the late 1970s or in 1978, also at this point, another group that was emerging was, the more militant group, which would eventually form the LTT, However, in 1978, what was formed? In 1978, actually, a new, the constitution, the Sri Lankan constitution was changed and a new president, and Sri Lanka now became a presidential democracy, and a new president, Jayawardene, came to power. A new president, Jayawardene, came to power, and it is this, and Jayawardene came to power, and Jayawardene first did two things. He further supported the consolidation of the Sri Lankan government hold over northern provinces, including moving in the army over the northern provinces, including moving in the army. And secondly, he did two things. Adopted a free market approach, adopted a free market, or opened up Sri Lanka's economy. And secondly, he also did something important. He sought closer relations with whom? No. Sir, free market economy, how can closer relations with China? Closer relations with US. So he sought closer relations with USA and also adopted a free market and an open market economy. And at the same point of time, he further supported the consolidation of the Sri Lankan government over the northern provinces. What is he exactly doing? Jayawardene is playing an important game. As he tries to consolidate his hold over the northern provinces, he is well aware that it may evoke what? A response from India. You know, the memories are already there. Which memories? Of the 1971 war. You know, as the situation deteriorated in, East Pakistan, India intervened in the 1971 war. And Jayawardene knows that here, so there is a bigger domestic repercussion for India if Sri Lanka consolidates its hold over North America, over northern provinces. So that is where he's playing a complex game. One side, he wants to consolidate his hold over the northern provinces. On the other side, he is adopting a open trade regime. He's moving away from non-alignment and socialism, adopting an open trade regime and seeking closer relations with USA. In fact, Jayawardene started talks with USA. USA was keen to set up a listening post or a radar post in northern Sri Lanka. Okay, so he was in talks with the US government, which also wanted to set up a naval, not a naval base as such, but a listening post where they would place their radars to monitor the movement of ships, etc. Now, why is he saying so? Why is he trying to move closer to US? Partly is that if he tries to consolidate his hold over northern Sri Lanka and the Indian government intervenes in any manner, who is backing Sri Lanka? US. Okay, so he's playing a complex game there, and that is what is his idea at this point of time. And as he moved in the army in northern Sri Lanka, you see 1980 and 1983, large anti-Tamil riots broke out in northern Sri Lanka and other parts also. Now, what is the point here actually? I've not been telling you the complete story because it's a bit more complicated. The TULF was formed in the 1970s, and after the formation of the TULF, you see, the TULF was a political party which wanted to contest elections and all of that. But at the same point of time, a militant group also arose in the late 1970s, and that is the LTT. LTT, or the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam. Okay, so the LTT formed the Liberation Tigers for Tamil Elam. Elam means what? Nation. Nation of whom? Tamil people. Okay, so the Liberation Tiger of Tamil Elam formed in late 1970s was a militant group which attacked the police and army, outposts in northern Sri Lanka. And LTT was formed by Prabhakaran. Prabhakaran formed the LTT, and this was a militant organization. Now, LTT adopted the symbol of the roaring tiger. Okay, LTT had its flag, and its flag was based on the symbol of the roaring tiger. And where did this roaring tiger symbol come from? It came from the Chola Empire. The Chola Empire also had this symbol of the roaring tiger. So they said that we are reviving what? The Chola Empire. And because we are reviving the Chola Empire ruled from where? The Chola Empire was composed of what? The Tamil regions. Whether that is in Tamil Nadu in India or in Sri Lanka. The Chola Empire also controlled Sri Lanka. So they're saying that we will revive the Chola Empire in a way. That's indirectly what they're saying. That is why they adopted that symbol and said that we will establish a strong unified Tamil nation. Now, talk of a strong unified Tamil nation could have consequences for India as well. In the sense that if they meant by Tamil nation what? Including Tamil Nadu as well as northern portions of Sri Lanka, then that's a problem for India's territorial integrity also. Right? That is there. And how are they going to do it? They're going to pick up arms. And they will, because they said that, all this talks, etc., to the Sri Lankan government has not worked. The TULF is a weak force or is a weak political entity. It can never secure the light of Sri Lankan Tamils. It is important to pick up arms. And that is why the LTT had been formed. The LTT formed by Prabhakaran. Prabhakaran is one of those guys who must be thoroughly respected. Because whatever he did with absolute perfection. Okay. So, you've seen that series, Narcos? Arre, kuch nahi hai Narcos. Sir, Narcos, if ever Netflix was to decide to make a bigger series, it should make it on Prabhakaran. He's one guy who headed an organization which was more deadly than any other militant or later a terror group formed in any part of the world. Okay. In the sense that firstly, as I always say, that Prabhakaran began his career. How? By being a student union leader, like Kanhaiya. Okay. But that is where the similarity ends. Because after that, what did he do? Firstly, he murdered a university professor only. Okay. That is how he started his career, and since then there was no looking back, sir. In the sense that Prabhakaran's simple idea was anybody who will come in his way, he'll simply assassinate them. Firstly, he started assassinating in the late 1970s a number of TULF leaders only. He said these TULF leaders, they themselves are an obstacle. Why? Because they claim to be the representative of the Tamil population, but they are weak representative. Who is the strong representative? LTT. So they firstly killed TULF leaders. Then they started attacking the army and the police outposts in northern Sri Lanka. And in response, and actually I did not tell you this detail, but in 1980, as the Tamil riots began, they had first attacked a police convoy, killing 40 police officials in northern Sri Lanka. In response, you see there is a wider anti-Tamil riot that breaks out in northern Sri Lanka as well as in other parts of Sri Lanka. And the LTT, gained more traction. And as, large-scale riots broke out, you see more than 2 lakh refugees, more than 2 lakh Sri Lankan Tamil refugees came from Sri Lanka came from Sri Lanka in the northern provinces to Tamil Nadu region in India. And again, what is there? Sir, intense pressure. So, India is now in a situation where it has an intense pressure again. Because the situation again deteriorated, there is again pressure on New Delhi from the DMK and the Congress also wants to contest elections in Tamil Nadu. Congress also has a domestic presence in Tamil Nadu. At the same time, there is DMK. And the DMK is also putting pressure on the Congress government at the center to do something on the Tamil question, to protect the rights of Tamils in Sri Lanka and intervene in the Sri Lankan question. But India's government is in a tricky position. Why? Because any intervention, because India could not think of any military intervention in Sri Lanka. Because A, it would lead to a negative impression of India. Secondly, what if Jayawardene, who was already in close talks to whom? US, would have a US backing. So India did not want immediate military intervention in Sri Lanka. And in 1984, what happens is that Indira Gandhi is assassinated. And then there are the upcoming elections. That is why, so Indian government did not immediately intervene in the Sri Lankan Tamil question. And the domestic pressure continued to build on. As the new government of Rajiv Gandhi came to power in 1985, the Sri Lankan Tamil question is only getting worse. The LTT has become a major force. It has become experts in guerrilla warfare and since then has been bombing what? A number of territories. Which territories? And since then they had been bombing a number of police and army positions in northern Sri Lanka. They had also been kidnapping a number of people to obtain ransom. See, if you have to fund your armed struggle, you need money. So they were doing all kinds of things, narco trafficking, even smuggling in arms, all of those things. So as they mounted an offensive also, the situation is worsening. Rajiv Gandhi government came in, and Rajiv Gandhi government got into talks with whom? The Rajiv Gandhi government got into talks with Jayawardene and urged for a peaceful settlement of the dispute. But as no solution seemed to be in sight, and in 1987, the Sri Lankan army enforced a blockade. The Sri Lankan army enforced a blockade on northern Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan army enforced a blockade on northern Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan army enforced a blockade on northern Sri Lanka. Their aim was to stop the smuggling in of arms into northern Sri Lanka, etc. But as they stopped or enforced a blockade in northern Sri Lanka, even the supply of food, fuel and other commodities was being affected. And this was leading to shortages, etc. also in northern Sri Lanka. And the Indian government was under intense pressure because the refugee crisis was only getting worse. And by 1987, almost close to more than 5 or 6 lakh Sri Lankan refugees, Tamil refugees were in India. So the situation was actually getting worse. And as the Sri Lankan army enforced a blockade on northern Sri Lanka, the Indian government intervened to airdrop commodities, airdrop food supplies into northern provinces. Now, to airdrop food supplies into northern provinces. Now, where is this logic coming from? To airdrop food supplies into northern provinces. Well, see, to airdrop food supplies into northern provinces, where is all of this logic coming from? See, the Indian government wanted to be seen as doing something. It could not afford to be seen as sitting silently as a Sri Lankan government went ahead and resorted to a use of force which only worsened the refugee problem. The Indian government wanted to be seen as doing something, but at the same point of time, it did not want to get immediately or want to do something which would be seen as a immediate military action against Sri Lanka. So, as a measure to firstly placate India's domestic, sentiment, India immediately airlifted food supplies into northern Sri Lanka and did not take any permission from the Sri Lankan government, only informed them a couple of minutes or half an hour before the airdrop was to happen that this is what we are doing. So this was to inform the Sri Lankan government not to take their permission for doing so. This was also indirectly telling to the Sri Lankan government, if we can drop food supplies, we can drop bombs also. Okay, so that is that. So it was a soft message, or it was a message to be sent out to the Sri Lankan government at the same point of time to be seen as doing something on the Sri Lankan question. And this got the Sri Lankan side also more willing into talks with India. This is at this time that Jayawardene and Rajiv Gandhi had a series of talks, and that led to the accord, the India-Sri Lanka Accord of 1987, also called as the Rajiv Gandhi Jayawardene Accord. And it is in this accord that both the sides came to a settlement, or both the sides agreed to have that firstly, both the sides, India and the Sri Lankan government, agreed to have a settlement over the Tamilian question. And the Indian government would be playing the role of a mediator between whom? Between the Sri Lankan Tamils and the Sri Lankan government itself. Okay, and the base for that would be the Rajiv Gandhi Jayawardene Accord. Okay, that is it. So you see that following these measures, the Rajiv Gandhi Jayawardene Accord, or the India-Sri Lanka Accord, or the India-Sri Lanka Accord, was signed in 1987, under which India would mediate between the Sri Lankan government and the Sri Lankan Tamils to arrive what? At a political solution. To arrive at a political solution. Now, to arrive at a political solution. Now, under this, firstly, see, to arrive at a political solution, Sri Lankan Tamils were the foremost group representing Sri Lankan Tamils, or the foremost political voice of Sri Lankan Tamils at this point of time was whom? The LTT, which was the most powerful militant group also amongst the Sri Lankan Tamils, and at the same point of time also was the most vocal on the Sri Lankan Tamil question. So, the Indian government was to practically negotiate between LTT on the one side and the Sri Lankan government on the other. So, the first thing, so under this, first, the accord required LTT and other militant groups to lay down arms and the Sri Lankan army to retreat to its base camp. And the Sri Lankan army to retreat to its base camps. Okay. That both the sides will firstly, so there should be firstly a ceasefire. Once ceasefire is done, then next thing should happen. And that is, the Indian government said that India supports a strong, unified Sri Lanka. India supports a strong, unified Sri Lanka. At the same time, India said that, however, the Sri Lankan Tamils are a major ethnic group ethnic, linguistic and cultural group whose demands for political autonomy must be accommodated under what? Under a federal constitution and the northern provinces the northern provinces must be granted the control of finances, law and order, land, etc. Also, what? Tamil must be recognized as another official language. So, firstly, what is the Indian government trying to do? Indian government is trying to reach a settlement between both the parties. The Indian government is trying to reach a settlement between both the parties. So, it is first saying to placate whom? The Sri Lankan government, that we support a strong unified Sri Lanka, meaning we do not support what? The demand of LTT for establishing a separate Tamilian nation or a Tamilian ilm. That's first thing. But at the same point of time, India said that, what is India indirectly saying? You learn from India's example. India is saying to Sri Lanka that you learn from India's example. Do not, Sri Lanka had a unitary constitution from 1950s till 1978. Sri Lanka had a unitary constitution. They are saying that move away from a unitary constitution, adopt a federal constitution. Under the federal constitution, create Northern province as an independent state and grant it more autonomy, including the control of police, law and order and finances, but under a one common center. So what they are arguing for is the devolution of power to northern provinces under a federal constitution for a unified Sri Lanka. That's almost like they're saying to them that you can learn from the Indian example. The way we dealt with the Tamil question, you can also deal with the Tamil question in a similar manner. And that is what is there. And all of this would require what? And this, India said, must be the beginning. So this is only the beginning, India said. And ultimately, the aim must be to give northern provinces more autonomy under a unified constitution. Okay. And many people today are saying कि नहीं, हमने उल्टा करना है कश्मीर में. Sir, one of the things is in India's federalism, we say India's federalism is what? Symmetric federalism or asymmetric federalism? Asymmetric federalism. Why do we say it's a asymmetric federalism? Because different regions may have different conditions, unique factors and demands which have to be accommodated under the Indian constitution. Arey, look at Delhi. Look at Delhi. That's also an example of asymmetric federalism also. Hai bhi or nahi bhi. Right? What? A state. Right? So, asymmetric federalism and its discontents may arise from time to time. But the aim is not to enforce some, some uniformity which does what? Which does not take into consideration the unique history, geography or other socio-economic factors also. Okay, that is why federalism is supposed to, take into consideration all these factors as well. Okay, I mean, you look at Haryana and Punjab. Both want Chandigarh. So, ठीक है, हमने बोला Chandigarh Union Territory. Haryana also has offices in Chandigarh. Punjab government also has offices in Chandigarh. So that is that. So asymmetric federalism is partly what is the way of accommodating what? Diversity. Okay. So these changes were to be implemented under what? The 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution. These changes were to be implemented under the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution. And however, for implementing the India-Sri Lanka Accord, firstly what had to be done? The first condition had to be fulfilled. That is, both the sides must lay down arms and there must be a ceasefire. And to enforce the ceasefire, who would go? The Indian troops. So, however, for implementing the India-Sri Lanka Accord, an immediate ceasefire had to be put into implementation. For implementing the India-Sri Lanka Accord, an immediate ceasefire had to be put into implementation. Had to be put into implementation. An immediate ceasefire had to be put into implementation, for which Indian troops were deployed under the IPKF, the Indian Peacekeeping Force. Now this is no Indian Peacekeeping Force. Now please understand, ये इसका ये कोई UN की peacekeeping से कोई लेना देना नहीं है. This is not a UN peacekeeping mission. This was a peacekeeping force which was being sent to whom? Sri Lanka, with the consent of whose government? Sri Lankan government. So firstly, India's intervention in Sri Lanka was not without Sri Lankan government's consent. It was with the explicit consent of the Sri Lankan government. And this is where you see that it is said that Jayawardene was a smart kid, as always. In the sense that it said that Jayawardene was a smart kid, that he got in the Indian army. Okay, Indians wanted to do something, so he got in the Indian army. Now this Indian army was to enforce the ceasefire. But firstly, the LTT was not very keen on getting into this accord, and only reluctantly had Prabhakaran agreed to this accord. And as soon as the Indian government got onto the ground enforcing ceasefire, LTT withdrew from the accord. LTT withdrew from the accord and started violating the ceasefire. And the Sri Lankan army receded to its army bases, more so in the south. Okay, meaning what? That leaving whom? The Indian government to fight, the Indian army to fight whom? LTT. Now many argued that the Indian army was fighting LTT with one arm tied to the back, in the sense that this is a huge political disaster for India. Okay, that rather than going to Sri Lanka and ensuring that the question is solved in a manner that it ends the marginalization of Tamils, Indian army is standing in Sri Lanka fighting whom? LTT, which is the Tamil militant group which is arguing for the rights of Sri Lankan Tamils. So this is firstly a political disaster for India with respect to its own Tamilian population. Secondly, the Sri Lankan government also said that India is the big brother. Jayawardene, who had himself signed this treaty, he said that the Indian government is the big brother. It was not so much Jayawardene actually, but more so the opposition parties of Jayawardene. So opposition political parties of Jayawardene started saying that India is the big brother which is interfering and violating the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. India pointed out that we are acting with the consent of the Sri Lankan government, but that did not matter in the domestic politics. Okay, so from many in the Sinhalese population saw India's intervention as unnecessary, okay, and also useless, in the sense that Indian government was also not able to bring LTT to a political settlement. On top of that, Jayawardene also did not implement the 13th amendment. Jayawardene, who had said that we will bring in the 13th amendment, he did not bring in the 13th amendment immediately. So neither the 13th amendment was being implemented. On the other side, the domestic political parties in Sri Lanka criticized India's intervention. The Tamil population in India was unhappy because the Indian government had failed till now to put the 13th amendment in implementation on the ground level, and instead was fighting the LTT. Okay. And the LTT were a prominent guerrilla force, LTT were a prominent guerrilla force and the Indian army had no prior experience of fighting in these areas. That's one thing. It was a totally new land and the LTT were prominent guerrilla force and India was not allowed to move in tanks or full scale ammunition into the war. Obviously, India does not want a situation where it is seen as using tanks against the Tamilian population in Sri Lanka when they went ironically to secure the rights of Tamilians. Okay. So India was neither allowed to fight a full scale war on one side. On the other side, the Sri Lankan, on the other side, the LTT, which was a good guerrilla force, had a better knowledge of the local terrain. From 1987 to 1989, more than 1100 Indian soldiers were killed in Sri Lanka in this IPKF mission. And it did not seem that the movement, that this whole, IPKF mission was going anywhere. Okay. And at the same point of time, when Jayawardene was defeated in the election next year, in 1989, Bhandaraike came to power. And Bhandaraike said that we will ask the Indian government to withdraw, okay, the troops. Okay. So, because Jayawardene did not ask the Indian government to withdraw the troops. So, Bhandaraike was of the opinion that when they come to power, they'll ask the Indian government to withdraw. And you see that eventually the Rajiv Gandhi government also lost the elections on the Bofors issue in 1990 and the VP Singh government came to power in India. The VP Singh government eventually agreed to withdraw the troops from Sri Lanka. Okay. The Indian government agreed to withdraw the troops from Sri Lanka and the whole IPK mission ended in a disaster. 1100 Indian troops lost lives. India's intervention did not solve the Sri Lankan Tamil question and it also generated a negative image for India in the domestic politics of Sri Lanka. Sir, that is why no Indian politician is saying that we will put troops on ground in Afghanistan. Pehli baat, on Sri Lanka we have a geographical advantage. On Afghanistan, we don't have any geographical advantage also. Okay. Secondly, the situation in Afghanistan is way more worse than the situation in Sri Lanka. When US has not been able to arrive at a political settlement in Afghanistan between Pakistan, between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government, how can India do so? Okay. And the last thing is India should put in troops on ground in Sri Lanka, get Indian troops killed and then acquire a negative image in the domestic politics of Afghan. So in that context, any Indian any Indian military intervention in the domestic politics of a deeply fractured Afghanistan is a very, very bad idea that has been argued by many a number of observers. It would partly be like repeating the mistakes of the 1987 IPKF intervention. So that's also something which is there. Is this much clear? Anything you want to ask till here? Assassination of Rajiv Gandhi will happen after this. Okay. So that is that. Now, you see, were deployed under the India. However, between 1987 to 1990, the LTT soon withdrew from the India-Sri Lanka Accord, withdrew its support from the India-Sri Lanka Accord, and thus conflict resumed now between, and thus the conflict resumed now between whom? Now between the LTT and the IPKF. The conflict now resumed between LTT and IPKF, and over the next few years, and IPKF in 1987, and over the next few years, more than 1100 Indian soldiers more than 1100 Indian soldiers were killed. More than 1100 Indian soldiers were killed in the more than 1100 Indian soldiers were killed in the conflict. And in 1990, India agreed to withdraw the troops from India agreed to withdraw the troops from Sri Lanka. The Indian military intervention in Sri Lanka turned out to be a huge setback to a huge military setback for India. The 13th Amendment was never effectively implemented. The 13th Amendment was never effectively implemented by the Sri Lankan government, while the LTT continued its military offensive. Now, ultimately, India withdrew its troops, from Sri Lanka, and eventually, after 1990, there were the upcoming elections in Tamil Nadu, and Rajiv Gandhi was there in the electoral campaign. Eventually, he was assassinated by members of the LTT based in Tamil Nadu. He was assassinated in the bomb attack by the members of LTT based in Tamil Nadu. So, it is in this context that, this is something which triggered a lot of, debate. Okay. Firstly, as the Indian Prime Minister was assassinated by the members of the LTT, till it brought about a huge shift in India's position on the Tamil question in Sri Lanka. In the sense that during the 1980s, India was trying to intervene between the LTT and the Sri Lankan government in a manner that the LTT's views were also heard, and there was an effort by India to get those views accommodated with the Sri Lankan government. Also, in the domestic politics of India, in the domestic politics of especially Tamil Nadu, there was a significant support for the LTT, which was partly a militant group and was seen as being the only voice trying to protect whose interest? Tamil interest. Okay. And however, the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi changed both the things. Firstly, the domestic political sentiment in Tamil Nadu itself turned against the LTT, and the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi generated a huge sympathy for whom? Congress in Tamil Nadu. So much so that after the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, when the elections were held in 1992 in Tamil Nadu, Congress formed the government in Tamil Nadu. Okay, so there was a huge wave of sympathy firstly in the domestic politics of Tamil Nadu for Congress and the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. That's one thing. Secondly, the position of New Delhi also hardened. After this point of time, the Indian government refused to intervene in any manner in the Sri Lankan question to intervene between the Sri Lankan government and the LTT. So the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi changed a lot of things, and India largely adopted a hands-off approach from the Sri Lankan question. And you see that next year even Bhandaraike was assassinated. So firstly, in the Indian Prime Minister is assassinated, the next year the Sri Lankan Prime Minister is also assassinated by LTT. LTT is not a small group, sir. It is a very deadly terror group. By this time, they would assassinate anybody and everybody whom they perceived as a threat. They assassinated Indian Prime Minister, Sri Lankan Prime Minister, Sri Lankan Foreign Minister, also attempted to assassinate the army chief of Sri Lanka. So in the sense that it's a powerful militant group, and by the late 1990s, by late 1990s, what is happening is that the Sri Lankan army again started a military offensive against whom? LTT. Now the Indian government did not intervene at this time in any public manner. But in 2001, you see, so following the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, India's domestic public sentiment and New Delhi's position hardened against the LTT, okay, and it adopted a largely hands-off approach. Now, between 2000 to 2005, Norway tried to mediate between the Sri Lankan government and LTT. However, all such talks failed. Norway, actually, the international community, the matter was being taken up in the United Nations, and Norway was appointed as a mediator with the consent of both LTT and the Sri Lankan government. As a mediator with the consent of both LTT and Sri Lankan government. And Norway was appointed because it was seen as a neutral third party, not having any immediate interest at the same point of time in the whole situation, or where it was not perceived to be taking as sides either in favor or being partial towards any of the groups. Also, Norway or Oslo, in Oslo, there is the IPCS, the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, who play often an expert role in suggesting solutions as well as mediating on such conflict-related matters elsewhere also. So Norway was the one which took the lead in the whole negotiation process. However, the negotiations did not yield any result. India largely stayed out of this process deliberately. And yes. Ji? I didn't get revenge. Revenge from whom? So क्या करें? Tomorrow if Indian Prime Minister is assassinated, तो हम क्या करेंगे? अगर suppose some terror group assassinates the Indian Prime Minister, what will Indian government do? Assassinate their Prime Minister? Assassinate the whole terror group? कहाँ थे पकड़ेंगे terror group को? Terror group, पहली बात is always, the one thing about terror groups is that that's not conventional warfare because they are not based out of any one state. They may stretch across states or within the state they may be distributed in so many other areas, तो पूरा पाकिस्तान उड़ा दें. If tomorrow, suppose a Pak-based terror group assassinates the Indian Prime Minister, तो क्या करें? Find and kill whom? कैसे? कहाँ जाओगे? कैसे? पाकिस्तान में कैसे जाओगे? So exactly ना वो 12 आपको क्या लग रहा है कि उस आर्मी को हम क्यों रखा है कि बस वो चाह रही है कि चलो पाकिस्तान. If that was the condition, India would have deployed that. There was an attack on the Indian Parliament. Many people do not know, but 1965 the Indian Chief Minister was shot down. The Indian Chief Minister from Gujarat was shot down in the run of Kutch region by a Pakistani aircraft. आप लोगों को तो याद ही पता ही नहीं होगा, but that's true. So the Indian Chief Minister from Gujarat was shot down by a Pakistani military aircraft over the run of Kutch region. Okay, and so what do you do? Now, what do you end up doing? And that was partly because of the mistake of the Indian side, that we were in the run of Kutch, in the disputed territory. This aircraft was flying. It looked like it was a military aircraft carrying a civilian minister. उड़ा दिया उन्होंने. तो अभी क्या करें? उड़ा दे पाकिस्तान. Sir, war again, as I always say, that war is something which is ऐसे थोड़ी है. Tomorrow, if you see that you declare war on a country, and then what do? ठीक है, declare कर दिया. अभी कैसे ढूंढोगे? We'll enter into Pakistan. बोलेंगे सब हट जाओ, हम आपसे लड़ने नहीं आए, सिर्फ we want to find the terror groups and we'll eliminate them. कैसे? One by one, एक एक करके मारेंगे. अंदर जाके मारना है कि उनको यहाँ आने दे? 20 crore people will kill. Sir, no power in the world has ever killed 20 crore people, sir.
Alone, General Tika Khan killed around 2 to 3 million people.
Alone he killed?
Means
2-3 million. 2-3 million कितने होते हैं?
20-30 lakh.
और 20-30 लाख में कितने टाइम्स आपने जोड़ा? तो 20 करोड़ होगा.
Army was 90,000.
अच्छा, तो आर्मी से देखिए, I totally sympathize that we should reduce the population of Earth also by 20 crores and eliminate each and everybody in Pakistan. But that's practically not possible to do. If that would have been possible, you know, every other country would have bombed out every other country and killed them and eliminated them. At the height of World War II, sir, at the height of World War II, 20 million people are killed. 20 million people कितने होते हैं? 2 करोड़. 20 million कितने हुए? 2 करोड़. 50-60 million. अब आप estimate, चलिए 50 मान लीजिए. अभी बताइए कितने हुए? आप क्या करना चाह रहे हैं? वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 into 4, वो भी सिर्फ पाकिस्तान पे. अरे कुछ तो लॉजिक. अरे एटलीस्ट आधे मार दे. स्टॉप. कहीं मत बोलिएगा, एटलीस्ट पढ़ाई में मत बोलिएगा कहीं पे. ये कोई लॉजिक नहीं है, कोई सोल्यूशन नहीं है. नीदर इट इज पॉसिबल नॉर इट इज डिजायरेबल. ओके, नीदर इट इज पॉसिबल नॉर इज इट डिजायरेबल geopolitically to even think of this. And I don't know why people don't understand this. Suppose you bomb out Pakistan, You kill 20 crore people, then Pakistan will be, suppose, even if that's possible in some parallel world. Now what do you do with that land? India will take over the land, then Indians will go and sit there. It will, हमारे को वैसे भी land की जरूरत है, so we'll go and settle there. What will China do? China will say, sit, हाँ ये कर लो तुम्हें जो करना है इसके साथ. हाँ? क्या geopolitical, इतना तो आप लोगों ने पढ़ लिया होगा अभी तक कि whether China will sit silently in all this process. You cause death and destruction in Pakistan, then you will have to rebuild Pakistan. Won't you have to rebuild Pakistan? Won't India will then have to invest resources in rebuilding Pakistan, presuming China stays out of it? वो भी नहीं होने वाला है कभी. करेंगे क्या आप? ऐसे अगर इजी सॉल्यूशंस होते तो आज के पहले कई लोगों ने बहुत बार उड़ा दिया होता पाकिस्तान को, या आज मोदी जी तो उड़ा ही देते. वो भी तो एक बम मार के रुक ही गए. क्यों रुक गए? क्योंकि कोई सॉल्यूशन नहीं है ऐसा. There is no military solution today on dealing with Pakistan in a conventional manner. Unconventional manner or limited wars may be fought, but absolute wars using nuclear bomb against Pakistan, Pakistan using nuclear bomb against India, sir, madhak nahi ho raha hai. Okay, it's not, it doesn't work like that. So between Norway, all such talks failed, and in 2006, Rajpaksha government came to power. Now Rajpaksha government came to power in 2006, and Rajpaksha is now playing the different game. Rajpaksha is like determined to launch a military offensive against whom? LTT. Once the talks had anyways failed, Rajpaksha is now determined to launch a full-scale end-game battle against the LTT. And he launched a wider military offensive against LTT in the northern provinces. At the same point of time, he actively approached whom? China for a closer relationship. And what is India doing at this time? India is largely staying silent. India is not sponsoring or supporting any resolution against the Sri Lankan government that it had launched a military offensive against LTT. Indian government largely stays silent. It offered no support nor any mediation on behalf of the LTT or to bring the LTT to table. India stayed largely out of it, despite the DMK was in power in the coalition at the center. So under the UPA 1, DMK was in power in the coalition at the center. Neither the DMK nor the Congress government said anything as the Rajpaksha government launched a full-scale military offensive against the LTT. And by 2009, over the next 4 years, Rajpaksha's, under Rajpaksha, the Sri Lankan army consolidated the hold over northern provinces, consolidated the hold over northern provinces, and eliminated the LTT, including Prabhakaran. See, there was a very long and bloody fight in these 3 years. The LTT was using, for example, both the sides were putting mines, okay, to stop the other side, and the LTT was also using human shields. So they were using Sri Lankan Tamils only as a human shield to stop the Sri Lankan army. So they were using Tamilian population only as human shields to stop the Sri Lankan army. Okay. At the same time, the Sri Lankan army also used a number of human shields. So both sides use human shields, but the use was much bigger by whom? The LTT. Okay. So it was a very bloody onslaught that went on for a couple of years at this point of time. And as this onslaught went on for a couple of years, at this point of time, India largely stayed out of it. And in 2009, even Prabhakaran is captured and killed. Okay, Prabhakaran is captured and killed by whom? The Sri Lankan army. And not just Prabhakaran is captured and killed, the whole family of Prabhakaran is killed, including his wife, including his children. Everybody is killed. Following this in 2009, if the militancy came to, or the insurgency came to an end, the question was, what happens after this? In the sense that immediately after this, the question was that, okay, now the LTT was over. But if the militancy was over, the political marginalization of Tamil had yet not been addressed. Rajpaksha said that we will implement what? The 13th Amendment. We'll implement the 13th Amendment, and what was said by now was the 13th Amendment plus. That we'll implement the 13th Amendment plus, establish a federal constitution, establish a independent government in the northern provinces, etc., under a one common constitution. But none of this has been done since then. In fact, Rajpaksha, is taking credit for this military offensive against the LTT. Eliminating the LTT, Rajpaksha wins the second term in 2010. Rajpaksha won the second term in 2010. See, I told you, winning wars is a way of winning popularity. Right? So he won the elections and came to power again in 2010. However, in 2010, there were demands by partly the international, by the United Nations and by other countries also, for a deeper investigation into the war crimes committed both by LTT and the Sri Lankan army. Okay, and it is at this time, now that LTT was out of the situation, and what was the situation was that the Sri Lankan army had moved into north and had taken control of more than 40% of the land in the northern provinces, while eliminating whom? LTT. So actually the whole northern province became a Sri Lankan army controlled area. The need was now to bring back the Sri Lankan army from the northern provinces, establish a provincial government in the northern provinces, give it powers, etc. Political devolution of power to the northern provinces had to be done, and an investigation into war crimes was required. However, none of this actually happened. Though the Sri Lankan government established the LLRC, the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. Reconciliation required firstly that the Sri Lankan army must be withdrawn and the 13th Amendment must be put into place. But none of this actually has happened since then. The Rajpaksha government instead, because to deal with international criticism, etc., the Rajpaksha government started moving closer to China. India also supported at this time a United Nations resolution sanctioning whom? Demanding that the Sri Lankan government implement the 13th Amendment and launch an investigation into war crimes. So Indian government at this time took a position on upholding human rights in Sri Lanka. At the same point of time, the Sri Lankan government tilted more towards China, partly also as the Chinese were keen after 2011 and 12, with the whole One Belt, One Road initiative kind of thing. So between 2010 to 2014, this is what is happening. Okay, the Chinese show an increasing interest in investment projects where? In Sri Lanka. And the Chinese are backing the Sri Lankan government at the United Nations also, and provided support to Rajpaksha's government at the United Nations also, and is willing to invest in the Sri Lankan economy also. So that is what is happening. That between 2010 and 14, while the international community and India urged Sri Lanka and Rajpaksha's government for an investigation into the war crimes, for an investigation into the war crimes and a implementation of 13th Amendment plus for devolution of power to the northern provinces and the implementation of the 13th Amendment plus for the devolution of power to the northern provinces and the withdrawal of army from the northern provinces to hand back the land, the northern provinces to hand back the land to whom? To the Tamilian population. Rajpaksha's government had failed to implement these reforms, though they established the LLRC, the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation. Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. Rather, between 2010 to 14, the China-Sri Lanka relationship grew stronger as China vetoed UNSC resolutions against Sri Lanka, demanding investigations in war crimes. Also, uh, uh, you see, the Chinese investments in Sri Lanka grew rapidly as Sri Lanka took interest in the One Belt, One Road initiative. And what are these projects? First was the Hambantota Port project. Here we are talking about the Chinese angle also. The Hambantota Port project, which was a 1.5 billion US dollars project to create a port, Hambantota Port, in southern Sri Lanka, in the southern tip of Sri Lanka. Now, Hambantota is a port city, or was a city from where Rajpaksha and his brothers had contested elections before. Okay, so the Chinese gave this proposal to set up this major port at the southern tip of Sri Lanka. Okay, at the southern tip of Sri Lanka. However, the point is that Sri Lanka already had what? A major port, the Colombo port, and many argued, including the Indian government, that this doesn't make sense. Primarily, it doesn't make sense. Primarily because establishing the Hambantota port in southern Sri Lanka is not required, because primarily they can focus on Colombo only, or expanding the capacity of Colombo port only. That's cheaper, faster, and makes more economic sense. But the Chinese were keen on establishing or supporting the establishment of this Hambantota port, and extended some $1.5 billion in loan for this Hambantota port project. And India said that it is not very commercially, it doesn't make sense, it's not very commercially viable. And India's concern is also that if the Chinese are constructing this port, they may take over the ownership of the port, and then the Chinese Navy can dock at the Hambantota port, and that can be a security implication for India. Okay, that's there. Also, they said the Mathala airport. Another vast new airport, international airport to be created, the Mathala airport, was to be created. And this was something around a $250 million project. Then they also said the Colombo city port, the Colombo city port project. Pardon? No. Right now India has the operations of it. So, but this is constructed by whom? The Chinese. Okay. So, you see that that's one thing. The Colombo city port project was also something which was talked about at this point of time. Now, the Colombo city port project, where they said that Colombo, which was anyways a major city, they will create they will create a new financial city in Colombo, primarily by reclaiming land from the sea. Okay. So the Colombo city port project was aimed at reclaiming land from sea and establishing a financial city. Now, establishing a financial city in Colombo. So, you see that this is the Chinese showing a lot of interest in these projects, Okay. Now, and sanctioning, and the Sri Lankan government sanctioned a lot of these projects. However, the Sri Lankan government sanctioned a number of these projects, uh, and without putting into public domain the total cost of these projects, or the interest rates at which these projects have been sanctioned, etc., etc. So, see, that's the thing. The point is not that the project is being created. The point is on what cost it is being created, and etc. So, you see that this is something which has been signed during the Rajpaksha government, and India watched with concern as the Chinese were increasing their footprint. Now, it is at this time that India hoped for a turnaround, and partly, India cautioned against a debt trap that may emanate from these high interest rate loans for projects, many of which may be financially what? Many of which may be financially unviable. Many of which may be financially unviable. Moreover, India is concerned about the increasing Chinese presence, including the possibility of its naval presence. Where? In Sri Lanka. Now, India expressed these concerns with Sri Lanka, and partly it was, and it was very clear that Rajpaksha's government was very much a hand in glove with the Chinese government, and even Rajpaksha's electoral campaigns, etc., were being funded by Chinese companies and all of those things. So, and that there were allegations of kickbacks from Chinese companies going to Rajpaksha's party and Rajpaksha's government. However, though many expected that Rajpaksha will win the election for a third term, it did not happen. You see that in 2014 elections, the 2014-15 elections, you see that it is Rajpaksha's government lost power, and you see a new government with President Maitripala Sirisena and the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. Came to power, and from this point of time, it is the Sirisena Wickremesinghe government which reassessed a number of these Chinese sanctioned which reassessed a number of these projects sanctioned for the Chinese companies under BRI. पहली बात, and under BRI. So the first thing is what they're doing is, see, the Hambantota port in 2017, see, ultimately after 2015 when their government comes to power, in 2017, you know, their debt problem is worsening, okay, and roughly you see that in 2017 on the Hambantota port, they had a significant debt on the Hambantota port, and some $1.15 billion debt to equity swap was agreed upon. Debt to equity swap was agreed upon between Sri Lankan government and the Chinese. Debt to equity swap, meaning that for the next 99 years, the ownership or the control of Hambantota port was handed over to whom? China. However, mindful of India's concern, it was said explicitly mentioned in the agreement that China will not be allowed to use the port, or will not be allowed to use the port for naval purposes, rather only for commercial purposes. Now, this is only something which is a matter of time. Many have argued that eventually later they may change the conditions also. What's that? Right now they've not, but that's a red line that India drew, and partly keeping in mind India's sensitivities, this has been agreed upon by the Sri Lankan government, but this may change in the future also. At the same point of time, that's one thing which has happened. Mathala airport, which was constructed, was the world's largest, emptiest airport, in the sense only one air flight used to go, क्योंकि कोलंबो में उनके जरूरत ही नहीं है सर उड़ान. A lot of airports in India took Udan under Project Udan. Many of these airports have already been shut down. No media reports this, but many of these projects have already been shut down. The Indian Prime Minister went and inaugurated this airport in Chhattisgarh, in the Bilaspur region of, no, not in the Bilaspur region, in the Bastar region of Chhattisgarh. Okay, that airport has already been shut down also. Okay, क्योंकि वहाँ से 2 फ्लाइट उड़ती थी, फिर एक ही फ्लाइट उड़ने लगी, फिर वो फ्लाइट भी कभी कभी आती थी, कभी नहीं आती थी, तो उन्होंने बंद ही कर दिया, because financially it was not viable. So the same is with the Mathala airport, and ultimately the Sri Lankan government urged the Indian government to take over the control of the Mathala, at least do something and help the Sri Lankan government at this time. And so in 2018, you see, the Indian government has taken the control of the Mathala, the operational control of the Mathala airport. Okay, that's there. Now, what has been happening since then is that Sri Lanka is nearing a BOP crisis. It's not at a BOP crisis, but Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves are roughly at $8 billion. It has to service a huge debt, okay, and a portion, some 15% of that debt comes from China. Now, it may be said that it is not, the major debt that they owe is not to the Chinese. That's true, but the debt they owe to China is of a high interest rate, and to that extent, that has been a cause of certain amount of concern. That what has happened with Hambantota may also happen with, either the Colombo city port, or the Chinese may ask for a free trade agreement with Sri Lanka. So the constant concern is, though the Sirisena government came to power, and it was believed that with Sirisena government coming to power, the Chinese influence in Sri Lanka will be addressed. That is easier said than done. The question for Sirisena government also is this, that the previous government has taken a lot of loans from China, and they have to service these loans, and the Chinese presence is not just going to suddenly disappear just because the Sirisena government has come to power. The Sri Lankan government will have to repay the Chinese loans, or else will have to do some these. It is the Sirisena government which did this debt to equity swap, because they had no other option. Some people said India must give $1.5 billion to Sri Lanka. Arey, why? And so that Sri Lanka does not transfer over the control of Hambantota port to whom? China. Arey, why should India give $1.5 billion? Sir, $1.5 billion is what? Is almost 10,000 crore rupees. Why should India give 10,000 crore rupees on a bad investment decision made by the Sri Lankan government? Okay, so this would have been a huge expenditure of Indian taxpayers' money on one single project, which is a clear miscalculation of the Sri Lankan government. So the Indian government did not, intervene on the Hambantota port. India cannot bail out India's neighbors if they do bad investment decisions with China. Maldives has been partly an exception because it is too small a country. It owes 55 to 70% of its debt to China. And Maldives is a small country. That's not the case with Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is relatively bigger, and it owes 15%, 1/5 of its debt to China. So in that context, you see, India did not bail out on the Hambantota project. However, India has signaled its willingness to step up its engagement in Sri Lanka as well. How? That already, what is India doing? India is constructing some 44,000. What is India doing in Sri Lanka? India is constructing some 44,000 houses. Where? In northern Sri Lanka. As a part, why? In northern Sri Lanka, to resettle those already displaced. So we are already constructing some 44,000 houses in northern Sri Lanka to resettle the displaced Tamilian population, providing an aid of, based on an aid of $350 million. Okay, that's it. Also, India is upgrading the LPG container terminal and the LPG and the container terminal in KKS. Kanesthurai in northern Sri Lanka. India has also offered some $2.6 billion in lines of credit for a number of infra projects. For a number of infrastructure projects. Now, so you see, and but at the same point of time, you see, this 2.6 billion is not really in operation right now. It may get into operation in the future. Now, India is keen on involving itself more. India also continues to be one of the largest, or to be one of the largest trading partners of whom? Sri Lanka. And also India continues to be one of the largest trading partners of Sri Lanka, and thus one of the things to be kept in mind is that the Chinese presence is here to stay, is likely to be maintained in Sri Lanka. For example, the Sri Lankan government has taken a loan of another $1 billion where? To connect for a major infrastructure project, for a major highway project connecting Kandy, which is a city in central Sri Lanka, connecting Kandy, which is a city in central Sri Lanka, to Hambantota. There is some 340 kilometers long highway which will be upgraded, etc., at a cost of $1 billion. So again, the debt to GDP ratio of Sri Lanka stands at 77%, and 15% of its total debt is owed to China. At high interest rates up to 6%, up to 6.2% in fact. So all of this, so the fear of the debt trap in Sri Lanka is very real as of now. And Sri Lanka may need a bailout also eventually in the future, may need a bailout, and in that condition, India will have to be involved in one way or the other. So, how all of this is going to play out, there is no clear, first thing is political stability to return to Sri Lanka, and then partly with the assistance of whom? India. Or, so what is the way forward for Sri Lanka is, firstly, political stability in Sri Lanka is necessary. Secondly, a thorough reassessment of Chinese funded projects in terms of cost and liability, cost and viability must be done. Thirdly, India, along with like-minded players, like-minded countries, such as whom? Such as Japan, under the Asia-Africa growth corridor, under the Asia-Africa growth corridor idea, must be willing to offer alternative funding routes for infrastructure projects in where? In Sri Lanka. See, the point is that India will have to join hands with other like-minded partners like Japan, and the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor project is based on this idea that, you know, if the Chinese are offering loans which are expensive and which are likely to push these countries into a debt trap, India cannot just keep issuing sermons. India must also form an alliance or must offer alternative financial options which are more sustainable for projects which are more viable and not for every other project. For viable projects, India must offer more, India along with like-minded partners must offer better alternatives to these governments. So again, you have to create an environment where there are more effective alternatives available to the Chinese options if India wants to retain the presence in these countries. That's largely about this issue, about the India-Sri Lanka relationship. And so that's there. Now that largely finishes the Sri Lankan topic. The next thing to discuss is, one of the last things to discuss is Africa. यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा fisherman वाला है that I'll discuss, but largely this is what is to be there. And Africa is one other topic that is left, and then ma'am will discuss, a few more things about South Asia, SARC, and other organizations, etc. So that is there. Now, is this much clear? Any doubts till here? Okay, small change today for now is pack up. I actually have some urgent work I have to attend to, and because of that, and so tomorrow just check the mail once, and so that if we are beginning at 12 or 2:30, just check the mail once. Okay, that is there. And what I'm looking to start tomorrow, once either I'll do, either just check the mail, either we'll start with Africa, or if ma'am is taking, that is the case, or else if I start with Africa, I'll complete Africa. It won't take much time, 1 hour maximum for Africa. Itna importance nahi dena hai. Okay. But Africa, there is a very good chance, in my personal view, 101% possibility of a question on Africa this year. in your examination. It can come in prelims also. It can come in mains also. There have been many a number of visits to Africa. And a question on Africa is long due. So after Africa, हमारा जो governance portion है, that is left. So let's finish the governance वाला first. तो आपका ज़्यादातर your most of your
कंटिन्यू में बाकी है, जुलाई वेस्ट का पूरा बाकी गवर्नेंस,
pardon
जुलाई वेस्ट का बाकी है, जून का हो चुका है.
governance. Okay, the June batch it has happened not for the July. Huh? In the June batch, Saurabh sir has taken, huh? But not in the July one. Okay. Okay. So you just check the mail. I'll see. Okay. Yes. Timings. Timings के आगे तो बोलिए कुछ. What is the timing tomorrow? अच्छा, your PSIR also. Okay, okay. So I'll see. I'll look into the timings tomorrow.